I want to share a chilling and frightening experience I had while traveling in Europe after graduating from university. I had always dreamed of backpacking across Europe for a year before starting a job, so after saving up money from part-time work during college, I headed straight to Europe. As someone who loves exploring different architectural styles, I was thrilled by the abundance of ancient buildings in Europe. After about 6 months, I was in Romania. While traveling Romania, I had a friend who shared the same hobbies and interests as me, so we traveled together. Romania was full of old monasteries and abandoned monasteries, which piqued my interest. And we sought out guided tours that would take us to these abandoned sites. Fortunately, in Romania's capital Bucharest, we found a local tour company offering a trip to an abandoned monastery the following day. However, it turned out to be located in a rural area 2 hours from the city. The next morning, we set off with our guide to the countryside. Upon arrival, we found other travelers waiting to explore the abandoned monastery. Including Mike and myself, there were a total of 10 pairs, each consisting of 2 people. After the guide checked the head count, we immediately departed for the monastery, which was situated in a remote location in the mountains, a 30-minute walk from the village. As it would get dark later in the mountains, the tour was an overnight trip, with plans to set up tents and camp near the monastery. After walking for about 30 minutes, the imposing abandoned monastery came into view. It was surprisingly well preserved, but the walls damaged by World War II, along with the moss and cobwebs that had grown over time, made it clear that it was indeed abandoned. Before entering the monastery, the guide gathered everyone to explain some precautions. 1. Once inside the monastery, never call each other by name. If you must, use nicknames or fake names. 2. Never singing or humming. 3. If you see a nun or priest inside, do not talk to them under any circumstances and pretend you don't notice them. 4. There will be a large well at the main entrance, but do not look at it or go near it. I thought the guide was just trying to scare us, but he was firm and serious, and his voice trembled slightly, so I couldn't laugh or take his words lightly. Anyway, we proceeded to tour the monastery. As the guide mentioned, there was a large well at the main entrance, with an iron cover fastened tightly with chains, making it impossible to see inside. We then entered the interior, and I was surprised at how well preserved it was. Although the exterior was covered in moss and cobwebs, the inside felt as if people had been living there. The monastery had 4 floors, but for safety reasons, we only toured up to the 2nd floor. Next, we visited the basement, which could not be accessed from the 1st floor but required going outside and around to the back of the monastery. Before entering, the guide warned us again not to speak, especially not to call out names, while in the basement. Later, when I asked why, he explained that it was an old custom or legend that if someone's name was called, that person would surely encounter misfortune. The moment we entered the basement, I felt a chilling sensation. The entrance was very narrow, allowing only one person to pass through at a time, and there were tomb-like structures scattered on both sides. There were also indecipherable hieroglyphs, and the layout was more complex than expected, like a maze. We only explored the initial part of the basement before making our way out. By the time we finished the tour, the sun was already setting due to the mountain location. The guide led us to a clearing near the monastery where we set up tents for the night. As people pitched their tents in pairs, a bonfire was lit in the center of the clearing, and everyone gathered around to eat dinner and chat. While eating dinner, I felt thirsty. So I went to my tent and picked up my bottle of water in my tent. At that instant, I noticed an elderly couple in the tent next to mine praying continuously while holding a cross instead of having dinner. I approached them and said, "Why don't you come and have a warm dinner by the bonfire after you finish praying?" The elderly couple paused their prayers, looked at me kindly, and replied, "We'll come over once we're done praying." Although I wanted to ask what they were praying for, I simply acknowledged their response and returned to the bonfire with my water. About 30 minutes passed, and the elderly couple still hadn't joined us. I mentioned this to the guide, and he responded with a puzzled look, "There is no elderly couple in our group." I insisted that I had seen a couple in their 70s praying next to my tent, so the guide and I went to check. To our surprise, there were no other tents around except for mine and my friends. The guide explained that they don't even allow people in their 50s to join the tour because it takes 30 minutes of walking through the mountains to reach the monastery. I was utterly bewildered. What had I seen then? From that moment, the guide seemed lost in thought. He gathered all people and told them that I might be in some danger. He instructed them to surround my tent, and he would keep watch at the entrance of my tent. Given the vividness of what I had seen and my overwhelming fear, I had no choice but to comply. My friend decided to sleep in another team's tent while I entered mine alone. The guide told me not to come out under any circumstances until sunrise and to ignore any voices I might hear from outside. I lay in the tent, but sleep was impossible. I was so terrified that I stayed awake for 2 hours, staring wide-eyed. Eventually, exhaustion must have taken over, and I fell asleep. After some time, I was awakened by a muttering sound coming from the foot of my sleeping bag. I slowly opened my eyes and looked down, only to see 3 nuns with unrecognizable faces sitting there, holding crosses upside down, and chanting something that sounded like a prayer or a curse directed at me. I was utterly shocked, but with the 3 of them blocking the entrance, I couldn't do anything. Despite my fear, I remembered the guide's warning not to open the tent, so I chose to stay still. After about a minute of this standoff, the prayer seemed to conclude, and the nun in the middle slowly raised her head and looked at me. I will never forget that spine-chilling face. Then, the nuns opened the tent and went outside. Left with no choice but to look outside, I discovered that there was no one around. Where did the guide go? And the other tents? I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation and thought I might go insane. As I was about to step out of the tent, I felt someone tackle me, and I passed out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in front of the well, grasping the iron chains. The guide and some of the male travelers were holding me down, preventing me from moving. They told me that while the guide was keeping watch about 2 hours earlier, he spotted me in front of the well, frantically trying to unfasten the chains, even though I was supposed to be inside the tent with only one entrance guarded by the guide. They woke the others and tried to calm me down, but even with 5 people attempting to restrain me, I was incredibly strong and had almost completely unfastened the chains. They managed to pin me down just as I was about to open the well, and that's when I woke up. The 5 men restraining me were much larger than I was, which made the situation even more unbelievable. We stayed awake in front of the tent with the guide and other travelers until dawn, and as soon as it was light, we descended to the village. The other travelers left, but the guide, with my friend's understanding, took me to a nearby church and explained my condition to the priest. The priest said that this kind of thing occasionally happens to people who tour the abandoned monastery, and that if I left without taking precautions, I might face dire consequences. He advised me to stay at the church for a few nights, so I stayed there, praying with the priest. However, whenever I slept, I was plagued by nightmares of being trapped in the dark basement of the monastery, wandering around trying to find my way out. Exactly 1 week after I started praying with the priest, I saw a light in the dark basement in my dream. I ran towards it and found an exit, which I used to escape, and then I woke up. When I opened my eyes, I saw the priest beside me, and I realized I had fallen asleep while praying. The priest looked at me knowingly and said, "I think you're ready to leave the church now." That morning, I left the church and resumed my travels, never experiencing any strange occurrences again. Even now, the memory of that incident gives me chills and fills me with fear, so I avoid abandoned buildings or unfamiliar places. I hope that all of you will also be cautious when exploring during your travels.